Welcome, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Deborah Donnelly. I'm the Executive Director for Alberta Wilderness Association, and we're very grateful to have you join us here in our Heritage building. We are stewards to the Hillhurst Cottage School. This is a primary school, a recognized heritage site in the city, in the province, and the historic place of Canada. And so we feel very grateful that we are the owners and stewards of this site and we can have events like this. So thank you for joining us for this wonderful discussion that we're going to have this evening. I want to quickly do a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, and Kainai, the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda Nation, and Métis Nation Region 3, which is here in Calgary, known as Métis, and all people who make their homes in Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So I just want to acknowledge some of the people that are here this evening, our staff who worked all day today. So at the computers, we have Kennedy Halverson, he's one of our conservation specialists, and Amy Tucker, one of our, our only communications specialist. Devin Earl, conservation specialist. And then we have at the desk over there is our lovely Maureen Ayuda, who's our bookkeeper, keeps us financially sound. And we also have in one of our board members present, so Jim Campbell over there. So if you want to talk to anyone from AWA after, feel free to talk to any of us. And of course, Philip Meinzer, who will be facilitating the discussion tonight. The AER and oil and gas has really been his file, so we're letting him facilitate this discussion as he's the one most intimately involved in this file. So thank you, and if you have any questions moving forward, please let me know. The washrooms are just in the alcove there, lights on the outside, so make sure you turn it on before you go inside. Other than that, have a wonderful evening.
All right, yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks Deb for the introductions. Yeah, again, everyone, I'm Philip Meinzer. I'm a conservation specialist here at Alberta Wilderness Association. A bit of sort of context for tonight. The Alberta Wilderness Association, you know, a lot of our different work, a lot of our files, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's coal, like, you know, energy related, now with sort of the expansion of minerals mining, the Alberta Energy Regulator is sort of a focal point when it comes to these issues, sort of providing approval, you know, whether it's regulating these activities, monitoring these activities, sort of, you know, managing these activities across the landscape. There has been a period of sort of sustained scrutiny on the AER recently, like over especially the last year. AER in the news for various issues, whether it's the, you know, the Kearl leak and spill, so that's the Imperial mine, and sort of the report that came out afterwards that they sort of withheld information about this for 9 months. Whether it's AWA's own work on sort of the McClellan file, so you know, trying to get the AER to reconsider their approval for expansion into the McClellan Lake wetland complex. You know, we submitted a report with evidence with concerns that you know, didn't the AER, you know, opened a process for this and didn't actually end up reconsidering their approval, so allowing that, you know, Fort Hills mine expansion to proceed in 2025 unless it can be stopped. And yeah, and then there's just like a whole host of other things recently. There's like, I'm not sure, maybe Sean will touch on it in tonight's discussion, but sort of UFC papers that came out about you know, collecting adequate funds for cleanup and reclamation for conventional oil and gas or the oil sands. You know, the growing problem of tailings on the landscape, you know, numbers somewhere between 1.5 and 1.7 trillion liters of toxic sludge kind of sitting up in northern Alberta with no real plan in place yet, or you know, approved process to deal with that. So yeah, whole host of things that all seem to have the AER at least as a piece of this puzzle. And the intent of tonight was kind of to bring together voices from different groups to share their perspective on sort of the AER, the situation with energy regulation in the province. And yeah, we're grateful for the panel tonight for joining us. One of our panelists is missing. Kevin Timoney was supposed to be here. He had a family emergency, so he passes on his apologies that he couldn't be here. But yeah, we have Sean Fluker from the University of Calgary. We have Mark Dorn from the Polluter Pay Federation, Joe Vipond from both CAPE, the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, and Calgary Climate Hub, and Natalie Odd from Alberta Environmental Network. And online, we have a panelist joining us, Jessie Cardinal, she's the Executive Director of Keepers of the Water. So I might just we'll start with Sean here, and we'll work our way down across the table. And maybe just provide sort of a quick introduction to yourself, would be, yeah, appreciated.
No, sure, Phil, thanks for having me. My name is Sean Fluker. I am an associate professor in the law school at the University of Calgary. I'm also serving as the director / staff lawyer of our public interest law clinic, which operates out of the faculty. And over the last surprisingly, 20 or so years, I've crossed paths with the AER and its predecessors and the various iterations of it. So I look forward to being able to have a discussion about that.
Yeah, Mark?
My name is Mark Doran. My background is 45 years or so in upstream oil and gas. In the last 20 years or so, I've sort of switched to being involved more in the land rights advocacy side of things. I represent landowners primarily in regulatory matters who host energy activities on their land for which operators can force their way onto land, oil and gas, power lines, pipelines, etc. Focus a lot on the regulatory and public safety issues of that, and more recently, for about the past few years, we've started the Polluter Pay Federation, which is an organization designed to educate landowners and the public to provide a counter lobby to industry's powerful lobby, and to hopefully in the future start letting so.
Yeah, Joe?
Yeah, I'm Joe Vipond. I'm an emerged doc here in town, and also a clinical assistant professor at the University of Calgary. I used to be on the board of the AWA not too long ago, maybe about a decade ago, for a couple of years. And then I went on to co-found the Calgary Climate Hub, which is a local now charity that really works hard on bringing the information on climate to Calgarians and to our administrators and counselors. My other hat that I wear is I'm the past president of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, which is a national charity that has numerous physician voices and other healthcare voices working on showing the public and media and policymakers that interaction between climate and other environmental issues and health. And I will pass it on to Natalie.
Thanks, Joe. I apologize. My voice is really rough, so it might disappear. So I'll speak as long as I can. Natalie Odd, the executive director of the Alberta Environmental Network. Been at this for quite a few years myself. Actually, well, way back, I was working with Green Calgary. Some of you may know Green Calgary, and then Alberta Eco Trust, and started some years ago at the Alberta Environmental Network. It's a network that goes back to the 1980s and was set up to be able to peer select representatives on the provincial stakeholder committees. Although I would say it should be rights holders, not stakeholders. The citizens have these rights, and providing information and viewpoints to the provincial government. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't, we'll put it that way. When it comes to AER, we have long had concern voiced from our members, many concerns, And one that, really brings together a lot of those concerns is, the management of cumulative effects. So that's, really why, we're interested in this. And I'll talk a bit later, about the fact that, we have really pivoted at our organization into campaigns. And we are very deliberate and intentional with those campaigns, that it's about talking to everyday Albertans where they are. We literally go to their doorstep, and it's about changing mindsets around, oil and gas being necessary for, Alberta to thrive and having a different vision for the future.
And, yeah, Jesse.
Well, good evening, everyone. Sorry I wasn't able to be there in person, but I'm happy to join nonetheless. So, I'm Jessie Cardinal. I'm currently serving as the Executive Director for Keepers of the Water. I'm Métis from the Kikino Métis settlement. And Keepers of the Water is an organization. We work to protect water. And so we've been, crossing paths with the AER since the beginning of the formation of Keepers of the Water, which was in 2006. I think it was in 2013 we went to the head office of AER. And it's been a lot around the tar sands industry, about the way that the tar sands, the oil and gas industry, the way it's being monitored, lack of enforcement, the whole monitoring program itself. There's a lot of issues there. We don't see any enforcement reporting. There hasn't been a state of the report since 2019. And also our work with the First Nations, and just how they have experienced with AER. And it's too bad Kevin Timoney wasn't on, but I can share more of some of our experiences that we've had with the Alberta Energy Regulator. So I'm happy that we're having a conversation, because it's needed. And I'm looking forward to, what's to come of this discussion this evening. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. I think as part of the introduction, some of you touched on this a bit briefly, but maybe, we can elaborate a bit more here. But have you or your organizations had any experiences with the Alberta Energy Regulator that you feel are worth sharing with tonight's audience? Like, it could be recent, could be past history. Just getting at the idea of how has the AER or decisions that the AER has made impacted your work or the goals of yours and your organization. And let's start with Mark.
Yeah, I've got a lot of history dealing with the Alberta Energy Regulator, ranging from simply just filing complaints on behalf of landowners, mostly to do with public safety matters, some very serious matters on many occasions. Those usually have to be done verbally, unfortunately. They don't seem to realize that anybody can apply for relief at the AER. They believe that they can accept applications only from industry. I filed a lot of formal applications to review potentially flawed decisions of the past, whether they be decisions to issue well licenses or decisions to approve various things. I've asked for a lot of enforcement, asked the AR to enforce the terms and conditions of their own licenses, permits, and other approvals. That's rarely done. Some very serious incidents: sour gas venting in the middle of the city of Edmonton, for example. Sour gas clouds floating across Anthony Henday Drive. Went out, shut them down, said, "You bad boys and girls, don't ever do that again." Next day, same thing, getting shut down again, over and over. In terms of how's it affected my work, that's probably the most serious matter. When I was dealing with the AR in Edmonton on these serious public safety concerns, I was deemed to be a dangerous person. I was not allowed to interact with their field inspectors anymore. They put me up, a group called AR Stakeholder Engagement began managing me. I cannot represent my landowner clients who have serious public safety concerns because they simply just manage you. They don't want to they don't want anybody to, be raising these serious issues that might put a bad light on industry, in my opinion. But that's how it affects landowners in particular in Alberta, and I want to stress that they're the people that are left behind. The operator personnel get to go home at night. They're there a short time at most of these well sites and other sites for a very short period of time to check. It's the landowner that's left to work beside that site to deal with offsite gas. That don't know the explosion hazards around well sites. I know that we had a big explosion, day before yesterday or yesterday, 2 days ago, I guess it was. And, so, these people are left behind to deal with these matters. And so I'm not saying that all sites are, bad in Alberta, but a lot of them are. So when I go to sites, I go to hundreds of sites a year. And, because of my oil and gas background, I see regulatory non-compliances at most sites. They range from minor to extremely serious, and hardly any of them ever get dealt with. So it's pretty bad on the landscape. And then there's good operators and bad operators as well, but for the most part, there's a lot being overlooked in terms of public safety, and that impacts landowners' rights to compensation. So we have a lot of serious problems out there that this regulator is charged with dealing with. And unfortunately, in most cases, it's just not dealing with.
Thanks, Mark. We'll go to Joe next.
So, the hub really hasn't been involved in AER to this point. And that's because we're so new, we're only about 5 years old. But let me speak a little bit from the Cape perspective. We're also very new into this space, and I'm really excited to say that we've just hired Dakota, and I'm sorry I'm forgetting his last name, but he is a Denny environmental specialist out of northern, or I guess southern Northwest Territories, right on the border with Alberta and Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories. And he's now based in Saskatoon, and he's going to be representing the interests of landowners, and particularly in Indigenous peoples, when it comes to the impacts on the atmosphere and the land of resource development. So watch this space. We are going to be much more involved now that we're on the ground. Personally, I'll tell you that I've been privileged to get to go to the last 3 COPs, the convening of the parties, which is the big climate conference that was last in Dubai. And I'll tell you, there's tons of Alberta representation there, and it's all on the side of industry and government. And over again, you hear the refrain, we have best in class, world-class regulatory stuff. And it's what they're telling the international public. And, I spent all day yesterday reading a bunch of materials in preparation for today, and it's just not true. So for me, personally, the work that I'm doing is that there's a bunch of lies basically being told about how we manage our landscapes and our atmosphere, and it's time that we get better regulation, because it's our goddamn problems, right?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Natalie?
Yeah, thank you. AER being a network of organizations, and I mentioned previously, we have working groups that are focused on land, air, water, conservation, climate change. And so what really matters to us when it comes to AER is the cumulative impacts management. And the AER does have a multi-stakeholder environmental advisory group that they bring together a few times a year to check in with. And what we've really been pushing is one of the few environmental representatives there is the cumulative effects management. And it has been, well, just sum it up by saying futile. Nothing seems to have ever happened around that. It seemed like they were making efforts, maybe some pilot projects, but there's we were told that, they needed direction from the provincial government before they could do things. Our sense is that they could have done a lot more than they did. And it kept going around in circles, and there has been such a turnover in, leadership and staff, and then they contracted because of cuts. It's really hard to know who's responsible for what, the buck gets passed around. So it's, very frustrating, trying to get anywhere, which brings up the, issue of capacity for, civil society groups, to participate in, hearings and, be able to sit there and be there the same way that industry is. And also, speaks to standing, if there's an application for a project, being able to speak to that and give input and, scientific expertise. If you can't get standing, they won't recognize that. It's been an ongoing issue. And, simple things like getting an organizational chart, as much as to even know who to go talk to, what do people do. It's very frustrating. And, as Jesse was saying, we don't have comprehensive reports coming out with the metrics that are measuring the things that we need to know. And knowing that they're really, I guess, being at the infancy of cumulative effects management, it's not surprising that they don't have reports to give us data. And earlier today is that they are not collecting data and not compiling it, so it's not being shared. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, Jesse.
Hi. So I think one of the bigger run-ins that we had with the Alberta Energy Regulator, there's been a massive amount of spills. Like if you Google, effluent spill, you'll see that they're happening probably daily. And so there has been a lot of pipeline spills and site spills of contaminants in all over, but in our case, it was in the Northwest, in Treaty 8 in Northwest around Deneta territory. And so we held a gathering up there in 2015, a Keepers of the Water gathering. And the people at that time, the chief, the council, the community people said, we have had spills here. The Alberta Energy Regulator, along with the company, has signed off on them to say that these spills are cleaned up. This has been happening for years and years. And that was one of the more recent spills that had happened in their community. They said, but we're out on the land. These people have up and gone, they signed off on this. So we are on the land. We are seeing that there's still contamination. It's still affecting our ability to harvest and hunt on the land. And there was, at that point, there's no resources then for the community to do further cleanup on their own, because now you see a lot of the nations and the Métis settlements are, part of that economy not by choice, but, by necessity has, now they have their own safety cleanup crews and things like that. They wouldn't have had the resources to go on the land and clean because AER had signed off on it. So what we were able to do, our small organization, was raise some funds to hire Dr. Kevin Timoney was the scientist that we hired to go out with community people to sample the land, to provide evidence that there is still contamination on the land. So we have that study, and it had proven that there was still contamination on the land. It fell on deaf ears. So we went to the government, we went to the AER, and it was like, so it just shows how much power and authority the Alberta Energy Regulator has been given, and how they are treating people when it comes to identifying concerns of contamination or spills or even engagement. And I find we're in an interesting time right now because landowners are being treated like First Nation people now and Indigenous people, because that's how we've been treated, for much longer than the landowners have. And it's not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling to be just completely discounted. So it's in that way, it's good because it's bringing us together. We're finding that commonality of, you know, here we have this powerful entity that was created to streamline, to allow approvals, but they're also given the responsibility to have to protect the environment. So it's really, you know, created to fail, you know, because you can't be expected to just have all these approvals and then you have this huge task of um, protecting the environment. And I think it speaks to, and I'll just wrap up there, I think it speaks to a bigger issue of how much the province has taken on and not having the ability to do it and leaving out important voices like the Indigenous people. We have been saying, we know our lands best. We know how best to care for the land and to manage the land. And, you know, we have been excluded right, center, and left of all of this. And so it's like, you know, the government tries to appear that they have things under control, but as we heard somebody else say, there's so much that's happening out on sites that's not being reported. And then just really quickly, I wanted to mention our other most recent experience with the Alberta Energy Regulator was the Imperial spill, which I think most people know about. That was 5 million liters of tailings ponds that leaked onto the land. The Alberta Energy Regulator is still not they will not publicly say they had been taken to Ottawa. There was a federal hearing. The head of the AER was taken there and he would not admit that they knew about the spill. So it's just really unprofessional. That's unprofessional. It's like, you know, but we're at the point now where we're looking at charges, hopefully, like ACFN has publicly stated they want people charged, because what had happened was that spill happened in 2022. I think it was May of 2022. The nations were not informed until a year later. And so we have now a government that's going, well, no, it's your fault. It's your fault. And it's like, meanwhile, there's like lives that are being impacted, and it just sets a precedence. And I think it shows this is the way we do business. So that's really concerning. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Sean?
Sure. So yeah, my focus has been, you know, primarily on the legal and policy side of how the AER operates or how it interacts with the public and with industry. And in terms of the kind of work I've done, you know, it's been a mix of scholarship, so studying, you know, how the AER operates, writing on that, publishing, you know, peer-reviewed research. I think more importantly, though, in terms of community outreach, a lot of the work that I have done and a number of my colleagues at the Faculty of Law here at U of C, publishing on ablog.ca, which is our faculty blog, and you know, we've always had a fairly strong complement of energy and environmental scholars, and so there's a good half dozen of us that I think write fairly regularly to this day on that blog, and it's not a coincidence. I mean, we certainly feel like it's important to try to inform the public and you know other members of the profession and industry generally, just on you know what's happening at the AER, and you know really just keeping on top of you know its ongoing work, you know, in terms of, you know, just so to as a service, if you like. In terms of subject matters, I've spent a lot of time on standing, participatory entitlements. I think one of the projects that I'm most happy with, but it doesn't get a lot of attention though, is I put a lot of effort into studying how the Alberta Energy Regulator and its predecessors allocate costs at the end of a hearing. So again, you know, in terms of participants or civil society groups, individuals, what have you, that manage to get in the door, undertake a hearing, contesting a project, what have you, those that have had that experience, will know and agree with me when I say, sometimes it feels like you're doing this all on your own dime, and you feel like you're being asked to carry a fairly heavy, sort of public, interest perspective. And at the end, it's really uncertain whether you're gonna have, get any of those expenses back, at the end of the process. And so, we undertook a multi-year project, really studying how those, how the AER awards those costs, to give people an understanding of what to expect before you get into the process. What expenses are you likely to get any money back on? Are you gonna get 10 cents on the dollar? Are you gonna get 50 cents on the dollar? Is there any rhyme or reason to how the regulator makes those decisions? So that was a big part of my work. And then over the last couple of years, without a doubt, it's been a focus on the liability management framework and the implications of the AER in basically all of the flaws in that process, going back to the mid-1980s. And the most recent publication that myself and two of my colleagues put out in the fall was directly related to that. On the practicing side, I represented clients, both at the regulator, but certainly more particularly in judicial proceedings, trying to hold the Alberta Energy Regulator to account in terms of decisions that it's making. And the clinic is currently active in one of those matters now, and most of those files or projects are, we choose to use our scarce time on files and things that we think may produce an outcome that will benefit not just the particular client that's with us at that time, but more generally others who may face similar situations. And so through all of that, I've come to know the AER fairly well. And I guess the last one I should mention is the clinic. One of my co-workers, more so than I, but I'm involved too, fairly extensive and regular access to information process with the AER. And it often doesn't produce nearly what you want it to, but I think it's helpful to have an institution doing some of that work, because we can't be outdelayed. We will just continue to press and press and press. And so, we have our hand, for example, in that Kearl spill, in terms of, basically have made the argument, but prepared to make the argument up the legal chain that, the Alberta Energy Regulator had an obligation to disclose what it knew when those releases first happened. And of course, many in the room and listening online will know that it took the regulator, something like 9 months to come forward with that information. So those are the kind of things that certainly we like to focus on.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Okay, so we'll proceed to the next question here. And this one may be tough, but we want it to be to try and be sort of objective, and to avoid focusing solely on sort of the negative pieces. With regards to the AER's sort of broader stated mandate around energy regulation, if we're hoping for change, maybe not everything needs to be scrapped, but is there anything that you or your groups feel the AER is doing right, or can be salvaged, I guess? And I'll start with Joe for this one.
So, a few years ago, the new government of Alberta decided that they were going to mine the eastern slopes. And this was a stated policy. And maybe it's more of a testament to Albertans than it is to the AER, but people stood up, and the Alberta Wilderness Association stood up, and the Alberta Environmental Network stood up and rallied people against this. And the government took notice, and the AER took it upon themselves to go around Alberta and get information as to what Albertans wanted, and they came back and said, no, we're not gonna go forward with that. So, again, maybe more testament to the power of Albertans and the power of the AER, but it was stopped. I'll do a caveat on that, in that, more recently, we've heard that lobbying from the Australian billionaire that owns the coal lease, they're now reassessing whether the Grassy Mountain mine, does constitute an advanced project and therefore allow it to go forward. Although it was, rejected by the AER a number of years ago, apparently a rejection doesn't mean it can't go on in perpetuity as an advanced project. It's quite confusing to me. It's kind of like, black is white, or, the sky is the ground, but, so, yeah, I guess there was that moment.
Yeah, Natalie.
So I didn't have to go first on that one, but, thanks. I want to piggyback on Joe's comment about, the mining and user slopes and, the work that people did together. Thank you for mentioning that, because I just want to add into that, that was also, landowners and ranchers, Indigenous peoples, municipalities, Portland. Like, it was, a really, more diverse group of people than you would normally see together. So, massive effort, and yeah, it was really great. It was almost successful.
We're not done yet.
Yeah, that's right. So, this is sometimes where I go is, the AR is made up of human beings, and, a lot of those folks are really well-intentioned. They're scientists, and, other professions, and they, would like to, do really good work. And I'll just say, I think they're really intentioned, good people, and, that AR is a machinery that, employs people. I'm sure there's people going there intending to do good work, and, it's probably quite frustrating to them. And if you've ever talked to a former AER employee, they might share that with you. So just want to remind, everyone, those are human beings. They, seeking a livelihood to support their family, and, it is probably frustrating for them too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Jesse?
I think I caught the question, but I think one of the things the AER is good at is making one of the most complex computer programs that makes it extremely difficult to navigate. So I think they're good at complexity in that way. I think that there's a model there. We, have been having calls to discuss the Alberta Energy Regulator. There obviously needs to be some kind of oversight. So that, is an acknowledgement of the need to have some kind of oversight. I think that, it's become a comfortable place for the industry people to go to. And so, that's really all I got right now. I don't know enough about the AER's day-to-day workings, but I will echo what Natalie said. There's good people in all places that we go, and I do believe that people want to do the right thing. I've worked for government, so I know that feeling of you want to do the right thing, but you're working within a system that's set up where it doesn't give one person a voice. It's based on a structure and a system. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Jesse. Sean?
Well, I mean, I think, the AER seems pretty good at, administering the technical, operations side of its mandate in terms of, the design and implementation of pipelines and well bores and, the sort of technical, the infrastructure side of the oil and gas industry. Certainly if you spend any time looking through the directives and the manuals, you certainly, I think can come away with that. Particularly if you're someone like myself who, is trained in law, as opposed to some of those technical side of things. But yeah, no, it's difficult. I mean, there's one-offs now and again, right? So I mean, this is, I think, related to the Eastern Slopes coal file, but I mean, the Grassy Mountain AER decision, is a good decision. I mean, it really thoroughly, that whole process, really worked, right? In terms of like hearing people out, getting the evidence. The decision is long, but it gets through the material. It's well reasoned. I happen to agree with it because, it rejected the application on the basis of Western cutthroat trout. But, now and again, that does play itself out. So there are a small amount of positives, but from a structural perspective, no, I'm afraid I can't observe anything that they do right.
Great. And Mark?
Yeah, well, I always say that the Alberta Energy Regulator has an extremely broad and varied and difficult mandate, and so even the best of regulators would make errors and need to expect errors, but the AR makes a lot of errors. But I do have a couple of good news stories. They did do a good job on a couple of them, and they credit where it's due. So, as owners of urban lands, my family's lands, which I manage, there came to be a very difficult operator who, the well had been abandoned and it's a residential area. So we're trying to subdivide the land and sell it. And it was a senior citizen's home that the government actually was funding. And the operator said, we're not going to list this well as abandoned. We want you to lose that land set. And so they refused. And so, you can't subdivide the land within 100 meters of an oil well. But this oil well has long since been plugged. The term is abandoned in Alberta, but that doesn't mean you walk away from it. It means you plugged the well. But it wasn't listed as abandoned. So I contacted the AER, and overnight they made the decision and they relaxed that setback 25 meters to the edge of the lot so that we wouldn't lose that important land sale from their parents. So that was good. Just in December or late November, reclamation certificate issued to the Working Law Association. They clean up it all on client's land, managed to have that decision reversed, and that happy to say that reclamation certificate was canceled. It's a really important decision. I don't think people understand the importance of reclamation certificates in Alberta. But so if the Alberta Energy Regulator issues a reclamation certificate when it shouldn't, that ends the landowner's compensation and that returns dirty land back to the landowner, both of which are contrary to law. And the best thing the Alberta Energy Regulator is good at is issuing immediate, capricious, and arbitrary decisions. They do that 60, 70,000 times per year, hundreds per day. They're very good at that.
And strategic communication.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we'll move on to the next question here. Now I know some of you have already raised a few, but and there are many, so maybe pick and choose your favorite one. But is there a particular flaw or issue with the Alberta Energy Regulator that you feel needs to be addressed or resolved in some way to achieve outcomes that are more in line with the public's best interest? Like, is there a priority one that you would tackle? And I guess we're starting with Natalie.
Yeah, thanks. I guess, what pulls it all together for me is the cumulative effects management, because if we really did that rigorously and realistically, and there were criteria around what could be approved and what couldn't, I think that there would be a lot fewer applications approved, if that was actually a criterion. So I think that would be really, really important. It would also require collecting data on many things, impact on the land. And once you start getting into all that biodiversity, there's so much fragility in those areas. And really the struggle to get those impacts assessed. And so I think that that's really important. And then beyond that, which is part of it, is full cost accounting. So if you know the impacts that you're having on land, it's also on water, biodiversity, air, there's health impacts. There's social impacts, if your health is impacted. There's personal impacts on you, to your community. And actually, there are also huge economic impacts to Alberta as well. All of those impacts together. And I think if we actually did full cost accounting and looked at all of that, this would be a very interesting equation, because we're willing to do all of this to support the oil and gas industry. Why? Because we feel it's important to Alberta's economy and livelihood in Alberta. If we really crunch the numbers, and there are people who have crunched the numbers, if you add up all of the impacts, if the data was being collected, we're already seeing the emissions, climate impacts, health, social impacts. And you also look at the subsidies that they enjoy, the tax breaks, really the royalty regime, where we've lost out a lot. I think we might see that we are not benefiting from this. And I think that full cost accounting and the life cycle assessment is really important. So I kind of cheated by scooping a lot of things in there, but that was my.
That's what cumulative effects is.
And I just acknowledge Carolyn Campbell, who worked at AWA for a really long time and.
Yeah, she is.
I just want to acknowledge and appreciate all the work that Carolyn did in this area, and just kept holding their feet to the fire, and is so knowledgeable and speaks on so many issues and is so credible, and sat on so many committees that like numerous committees, and I just want to acknowledge all the work Carolyn did.
Hey, Carol.
Moving to Jesse now.
I think for me, one of the biggest issues that I see as an Indigenous person, you know, we are often excluded from, we're demuted to stakeholders, and, you know, we're rights holders. And so we need to have an independent Indigenous body that works alongside the AER. So this way everyone has peace of mind, because they can say that they're supposed to be independent already. I might have to mute because my kids are screaming in the background. Sorry. But they say that they're independent already. So how much more independent are they going to appear to be? What we need is something that's truly independent, that includes Indigenous people as rights holders to be a part of all of the decision making. So that includes the monitoring, the reporting, the enforcement, all of the decisions that are being made. So that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. Sean?
Yeah, I'd say there's 3 or 4 definitive issues that I consistently raise with anybody who wants to talk AER, and so, you know, those won't be a surprise to some in the room who are listening online. But one is, and these aren't necessarily just AER problems, but they are acute at the AER. Discretion. I mean, the AER, the legislative framework governing this agency is full of discretionary power. So there are very few rigid, explicit rules that govern what the AER must do. At almost every corner, it's discretionary, up to the regulator to decide whether to do A or B or nothing at all. That makes it extremely hard to hold the agency to account, politically or in a legal sense. Secondly, transparency, disclosure, what have you. The AER is an extremely closed, secretive body. It is excruciatingly difficult to get information out of the AER, even when it is really just, you know, information that it is collecting and assessing on your behalf. It's really, really difficult. Transparency is a major problem. And then lastly, regulatory capture, as has been raised by many over a long period of time. The current AER is almost completely funded by industry, and evidence that, you know, that we relied on in the study that we just published in the fall clearly demonstrates influence by industry that leads to major changes in policy direction that have significant impacts on the public. And so, you know, those three things alone often fully describe or explain the whatever problem you happen to be facing in relation to the AER. So those are the three common ones. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark?
Yeah, that's a subject you could go on about for about a week, but I'll pick two that I think the most important ones are, and not dwell on it too long. The one that affects, I think, everybody the most, certainly all Albertans and possibly all Canadians, is the AER needs to either measure the solvency of its licensees and permit holders and ensure that adequate means are collected security so that to cover their end of life obligations, or as the statutory scheme envisions, make sure that wells are properly named orphans and that the industry is required to pay into what's called an orphan fund. That's a safety net for all of us. It's the, in my opinion, the envy of the world. It's the safety net of all of you so that you never have to pick up the tab for industry, but the AR is not doing. And that's the one that impacts, I think, most Albertans, but the other one that impacts so many Albertans, particularly, and people have talked a lot about standing and stuff, is the AR is supposed to adjudicate disputes between parties. And they have got no problem adjudicating disputes between operators for the most part, but when it comes to stakeholders or landowners, other members of the public, to get a hearing at this body is next to impossible. And let's be clear, there's lots of years where there is no hearings whatsoever in oil and gas. For example, a couple of years ago, they did 2 coal hearings. That was it. Not one hearing in oil and gas. And if you think there's nothing in dispute in oil and gas in this province in a given year, I've got news for you. And so, but I mentioned before, I said that they make quick, arbitrary, capricious decisions. Well, this is because there's so many review provisions in their enabling statute. They have hearing commissioners that sit idle almost all the time. There's 11 of them. And they're supposed to review those quickly made decisions if they turn out to be potentially flawed or circumstances change. And this is pretty rare. So they started to conduct a few regulatory appeals recently. We're here tonight largely because Alberta Wilderness Association asked for a reconsideration of a potentially flawed decision. They are almost never conducts reconsiderations, and so they should, because you know things change, circumstances can change. We have a good operator sells their operations to a bad operator, and the bad operator is endangering people's lives. We ought to have a hearing about that, and but that just about never happens. So that's their failure to carry out their quasi-judicial mandate. These hearing commissioners sit there and do absolutely nothing when they could be, adjudicating all manner of disputes that by decisions that could be appealed to the courts. And if we don't hold them to account through appeals and asking them to review their own decisions, there's no incentive to get better. So because there's no review of their decisions, they just get worse and worse and worse and worse. And they're not what did you call the world class? Far from best in class. Let's put it that way. So that's a really big one. Lack of carrying out its very serious mandate to adjudicate disputes is a serious problem.
And Joe?
I was kind of worried that going last would run out of things. I'm like, oh no, they're gonna take all my ideas, but But we spent the whole day today talking about this, and there were so many things that were brought up. So instead of like these being my favorite, I'm just gonna bring up the stuff that I think that we just haven't talked about yet. The first is the oil sands as an entity. In particular, the remediation of the sites and the tailings ponds. There is no plan. Like, there's no plan. The government has actually put up many times that you need to have a plan by X date, and then that date passes, and the industry's like, well, we don't know what we're gonna do yet. And so we have these reclamation and remediation liabilities that are on the books, and there's a structure, and it's quite complicated. I really encourage you to read the AB log paper on that, 27 pages. It'll take you a couple hours, but it's worth it. But it speaks to the fact that the way it's structured, there's a very, very low likelihood that the companies that are currently responsible for that remediation and reclamation are ever going to be paying that, and that it's probably going to be coming from us, from the citizens of Alberta. And I think your comment today was that if you put it all together, it's about $54,000 per person in Alberta that will be responsible, right, who will have to pay. And I got kids. I'd love to stay in this province, but do I want to recommend that they stay in a province where they're going to have so much facing them, including the toxic and financial implications of all this? And then the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm a little bit of a broken record on this, but climate is just not factoring into any of these decisions. It is the biggest thing facing humanity at this time, and it's just not even an entry on any of these discussions. And we're in big trouble, and we need to pay attention to the things that we're looking at down the pipe.
One brief thing, I want to follow up on what Jessie said. She said they're calling for fines, but someone sent me a news report today that some Bitcoin miners who are generating electricity at well sites without the necessary permits fined $400,000 today for some Bitcoin mining. But where are the fines for much more serious oil and gas infractions that happen? These companies almost never get fined, and they should be fined, and probably far worse. And I want to say how that these decisions all impact landowner compensation. It's never talked about. So I'm the director of the Polluter Pay Federation, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We want to make sure the polluter always pays, but a big part of the equation in Alberta is landowner compensation. Landowners they don't have a choice, more or less, in Alberta. These oil companies can force their way onto your land if you refuse entry. And you can't evict an oil well, it's there forever. This is not a landlord-tenant relationship. And if we fail to pay landowners for their losses, they are subsidizing oil and gas, and that's occurring increasingly in this province. And that's the trend. And people need to understand that landowners have rights and probably don't really understand the laws, and certainly don't understand the public safety issues of this dangerous activity that they're farming right past, and probably could be explosive vapors, etc. So we're overlooking farmers and landowners and Indigenous rights. The people on the land, they're the ones left behind to breathe these toxic fumes and be at risk of explosion, etc. And we're not allowed to profit. We're only allowed to recover our losses. But if the system is such that we can't get a hearing, or etc., so then we're subsidizing. And some people have really subsidized, including with their lives.
All right, so we'll move on. We'll move on to the final sort of formal structured question. We'll start with Jessie. In your opinion, what is the path forward for environmental interests, Indigenous interests, concerned citizens, or other to push for these much needed changes? Like how do we achieve responsible energy regulation in Alberta? Not a simple answer, I'm sure, but yeah, where can we start, Jessie?
Well, I look at the current situation that we're in. So I think everybody has kind of touched on it. And now we are in a drought, and we're in a water crisis. How did we get there? So we got there because things have been unbalanced. We are out of balance. What has been happening is not sustainable. Scientists around the world have been saying it. They've been saying that the ice caps are melting, that the sea levels are rising, that the emissions. So there's been warning signs for like decades now. And the Alberta government has not listened. They've gone ahead with blinders on, with this superiority that we are superior to the environment. We are a part of the environment. We are no much more superior than the bears that live here, than the moose that live here. But we have become this petro state where it's just normalized that that is all we have. There, we face violence when we talk about anything else, when we talk about diversifying the economy. I lived in a time where you couldn't even say the word climate change or you were targeted. Um, and so it took a shift, that shift to happen, and then the NDP got voted in and the Liberals, and then all of a sudden there's all kinds of climate change programs and everybody's using it. And I'm not saying those parties because I don't think one is necessarily the better one. When you're an Indigenous people, you still deal with the oppressiveness of the governments. But it's like, so, we've been trying to warn people for a long time. What the government is allowing, along with the Alberta Energy Regulator, is not sustainable. So now we are in a situation where we have massive amounts of industry that have all kinds of water licenses, and they have all these rights now. They've been given so many rights, like even in the legal system, right? Like Suncor can go to court as a person, but we can't go to take the Athabasca River to court as a person. So that's how far out of balance we are. And now people are scrambling to say, who's going to have rights to water? And we still, even at this point, we still have the Canadian Association for the Petroleum Producers lobbying the Alberta government for water. And so we knew this. We seen these like, so-called like I'm not going to use the word war, but these variances for water. And so what do we need to do? We need balance. And so we've said we need to cut back. And when we say that, people are like, oh, you're against oil and gas, go live in a teepee, and and all this violence. And that's not ever what we were saying. Like we all use oil and gas, but we were saying what is happening is unsustainable. Who's making the money? We had a landowner say, well, not us, not the Indigenous people. We still are living in high rates of poverty. You should see the housing on the First Nations. Like, it's just so these companies, and these CEOs, they make massive amounts of money. And what I say is, if we were to backtrack and get the money, and I'll just take 2 more minutes, if we were to backtrack and take all the money owed to us, we wouldn't be in this state of desperation where it's like, we have to sign another project. We have to sign another project, or I'm not going to be able to feed my family. There is enough projects currently, even with scaling back, to meet the needs of the people. So we do need to scale back. So that's what needs to happen, is we need a body that includes a regulatory body that includes Indigenous people that are going to roll up their sleeves and look at what does scaling back look like and make it happen, because we can't go forward the way we are. And it's scary because in this petro state, the Alberta government is just like, oh, our growth plan, but they don't take into account all of the other things that somebody in the chat mentioned and that Natalie mentioned. They're not taking, so they're like growing in numbers, like, that's that colonial mindset of like viewing everything in money. So it's like, they're only seeing these money things, but they're not saying, oh, well, if we take 10 more projects, well, that's like millions and millions more liters of water. That's more deforestation. That's more air pollution. So, we're not in a position to grow anything. We need to cut back. So that's what we need is we need everybody to stand behind this and to say that change needs to happen because change is being forced upon us. We are being shown that water is the boss. We don't know when it's going to rain. We don't know when it's going to snow. So we're not superior. So let's just do the right thing. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Kathy. Sean, you gotta follow that up?
Well, look, I'll be brief. There needs to be a way, or it has to be found, there has to be a way found to change the narrative in this province so that a group or an organization or people who want to challenge how the oil and gas industry does its work in this province, that those voices aren't seen as un-Albertan, frankly, at the end of the day. That is the high level challenge, because that's the reality on the ground for all of these issues. So, how you get there, be politically active. This is a political fight, right? So get politically engaged in any way that you are comfortable doing so. It really is going to take the effort of every single person who feels that way to do something, and it's the long game. This is not these changes are not something you can produce over, even just 1 or 2 election cycles. This is the long game. And remember, at least my view is, and I think it's apparent when you listen to discussions like this, on our side of the ledger, there are a large number of diverse concerns and issues, which means this side of the ledger is not nearly as organized as the other side of the ledger, which has a relatively simple, straightforward message. And so they have a huge advantage when it comes to sort of scoring on the political front. At the end of the day, that to me that's fundamental, and it's the long game. There is momentum underway. I mean, thanks to the work of several who are here or that are online, in terms of making the liability issue the topic of discussion that it is. That's work, as some have been working on that for the better part of a decade, right? And so that's how long it takes, and realize some of these issues end up getting legs that can prove to be fruitful in the long run politically, others not so much, right? And so be prepared to perhaps accept the view accept the reality that the issue that you care the most about isn't going to have the legs that it needs to have to produce the changes that you want to see happen. To me, that's the challenge.
Mark?
Well, of course, everybody needs to call their MLA and insist on reform of this regulator to make sure that your MLA knows that they won't have their vote unless we have a return to the rule of law, the largest regulator in the land, most important one in my submission. But I think there's other things we can do. I think that the public is extremely unaware of how to file a simple statement of concern at the AR, because they don't tell you. You must state why you have a right. You must ask for that hearing, etc. We can educate people how to do these things. How do more people have to object? It's not always about stopping the project. It's getting a lot of the times about terms and conditions that we can have enforced, and that's important. It isn't always just about stopping these activities. It's about conducting them in a proper, responsible manner. The name of the law is the Responsible Energy Development Act, and we have not accomplished that goal in this province. One thing people don't realize is that we got a heck of a lot of wells in this province. We compare ourselves to the Middle East, but there's very few wells in the Middle East. We have more wells in one tiny little corner of Alberta that they have in the whole entire Middle East. We've got 460,000 holes in the ground in this province, and they're all gonna leak gas for all time to come. They're gonna have to be re-entered every 100 years or 50 years or so for till the end of time. And we're not prepared for that. People don't know that. They're in our schools, schoolyards, in our roads, in our playgrounds. We have to educate people about how many holes there are in the ground and where they are in this province. And we gotta stop cutting them off and hiding them and pretending that this gas venting that's going on underground is not happening. So it's gonna take a lot of education, it's gonna take a lot of change, but, you know, I think that's the main thing we can do is groups like here. And today I'm very happy to say that a bunch of groups came together and agreed to form a coalition, and my biggest hope is that we can start educating Albertans with real factual information that our industry and our government have let us down. And I want to stress one point. Energy developers are supposed to explain their projects to landowners and people in the area, etc. They're just not doing it. They're supposed to explain the public safety laws. They're just not doing it. People don't realize how harmful some of these activities are or can be. And I think we need to raise public awareness about that. And I'm really concerned about the health issues of breathing, the massive emissions of hydrocarbon gas. We have some of the worst air quality in this province and portions of this province, greater Red Deer area, greater Peace River area, and certainly the greater Lloydminster area, some of the worst air quality in the entire world. Because we're venting illegally massive amounts of hydrocarbon gas to atmosphere. And climate change reasons and health reasons, we could stop it tomorrow. We have the laws. Venting gas is illegal in this province, and everybody should know that. We could stop it tomorrow. We don't have to do it. So I think people, and we've got the biggest pipeline network in the world. We're in a pipeline going close to every one of these wells. For very little money, we can conserve every cubic inch of this gas that's being just wasted off into atmosphere, especially at oil wells all across this province. So we have to start doing it. Otherwise, we're just gonna have a desert here in the future.
So how do we reform the AER so that it can be better serve the needs of the citizens? Well, it's impossible. Like, it's totally impossible. We have a captured government. We have a captured regulatory agency, and it's totally impossible. But fortunately, I'm okay with impossible, because I was told in 2012, when we took on the coal industry, I was told it was impossible to get rid of coal out of our electricity system, and it's happening in about 5 months. So, hey, let's do the impossible. One of my favorite quotes, which I mentioned this afternoon, was, when the impossible becomes merely difficult, you know you've won. So how do we make it become merely difficult? And we've already talked about it here. It's about democracy, because for some reason we think democracy happens every 4 years when you go into a voting booth, but that's not actually true. Democracy, participatory democracy, means engaging in between elections so that we get the systems that we want. And to David Parker's credit, I don't give him a lot of credit for much, but he knows how to do democracy. He knows how to galvanize people, and we need more people on the side of health and beauty and future to step up. And so that's the only way we can do it. And so we started on our first step today. We organized a bunch of caring people in a room in the afternoon, and then we organized a bunch of caring people in the evening too. And let's see where this goes. You know, the other side has money and political power, and we have human beings and truth. So let's put them together and let's see who wins. I'm hoping that it's us and truth. So, yeah, let's do it. And Natalie.
Thanks. There's one more thing. Okay. So, we haven't really said this word too much tonight. Transition, off of fossil fuels. And, which I'm gonna do here. I hope the energy that we're regulating in future is not this oil and gas and fossil fuels. So, I'm gonna put that straight out there. And what do we do about it? So, I've worked in the environmental sector for more than 2 decades. And I can tell you, I'm a failure in this work, so I'm not Frank's. I'm a failure in this work. And I fully admit that because, it has taken me till recently to really embrace the fact of what is strategy and effective campaigning. Because, do we know what it is that we're asking for? Is it just to tweak the AER, have them restructure, or do we want to transition off of fossil fuels? And what is the bigger picture here? Are we gonna change this? How are we gonna change the system? And I just want to throw out a statistic because a lot of people bash Albertans, even we are bash ourselves. 2/3 of Albertans agree that climate change is man-made, people-made. And that we need to transition off of fossil fuels. That's 2/3 of Albertans. And I don't think most people realize that, and we're in the majority. So what we've done at Alberta Environmental Network a few years ago with Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, we did a campaign called Defend Alberta Parks. And we decided we needed to use all the tactics that we find are effective in political campaigns and apply them to an environmental campaign. And as probably a lot of you know, it was pretty successful because we engaged people. We planned that for months to figure out what would be resonant with Calgarians, how can we present that issue? Most of them didn't even know what was happening, so we had to even let them know. That was, I'm gonna admit, quite an easy campaign because like 99% of people don't want parks closed. So it was just a matter of giving them a tool to express that, which is great. Now, this is much harder. We have a program called Alberta Talks. I'll say hi to Molly and Mel, if they're watching, and Ellen Barbara. This is about deep canvassing. It's about going out as citizens. We literally go door to door to engage citizens, talk to them, have compassionate conversations, relate to them, tell personal stories. They open up themselves. It changes mindsets about these issues. We introduce some facts, but it's not an overload of facts. We are very selective in the facts that we mention, and we connect as human beings. We also do connect issues. So for example, the one that we've really been talking about, we're concerned about climate change, but what we find resonates, having gone to the door, is the fact that oil companies and other corporations pay 8% tax instead of 12%. So you're getting all these subsidies and giveaways, and then, the liabilities, they're getting paid to clean up things that are legally required. All this money that could be going into health and education and housing. People are having a really tough time right now, and that is what they connect with, the personal story. So we're going door to door, there's fewer than, the average number of people in the house is fewer than 2. People are by themselves. They welcome the opportunity to be asked their opinion and talk to other people. And I think we'd be really surprised what people are saying on the doorstep. And we go door to door. These aren't people that we expect to be environmentalists or anything. So I just want to say that we have to challenge ourselves about how we connect with everyday Albertans, figure out what matters to them. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it's not facts. Like, we spent all day today talking about these intricacies and the technical aspects, and I really appreciate our whole team does, because we need to know the scope and depth and complexity of this issue. But we do have to find a way to make this meaningful and relevant to everyday Albertans. After we talked, we were asking people to call their MLA on the doorstep. A lot of them didn't even know they could do that. How do you find the number? And we're putting that on it right there, and they're calling their MLA. So we're trying to do as many calls as we can. And this is a long game, shifting mindsets. I just want to say we need to find a way to engage with Albertans where they are. So I'm really plugging Alberta Talks because in my decades of work here, it is the only thing that has worked to really change mindsets permanently and to connect with people. So that's how we're building our community. So I just want to really have people think about that kind of strategy and connect, because it doesn't happen magically with a lot of facts. There goes my voice, you're lucky.
Okay, so that was pretty much, I have one more formal question, but I might save it because I want to save some space for public discussion. So questions from the floor or from the Zoom. Maybe if you could direct, I don't know if there's specific questions for particular individuals or orgs. You can direct it to particular individuals or, or to the floor, I guess, in general. I think those are the first hand.
I just want to say to Natalie that we worked for the last 2 years for our NDP candidate in varsity. And I'm going to really reinforce what you said. People need, they want to talk. And I've had a couple of businesses where they disagreed with everything and I would say, well, yes, but you know, our candidate feels that way too. And everything I would say, there would be a talking point that came back to me, and at the end of the discussion, I said, well, I better get back to her. The woman said, thanks for the conversation. And I thought, she thought that was a conversation, which means she doesn't have them, right? And it seems like, I think that's exactly what we have to do. Maybe not just on the door, but even in these meetings, open it up sooner because people are dying for conversation. And many of them are dying for conversation because like you said, a large percentage of us already know about climate change and are scared that we might be in trouble and trying not to think about it. But if a few conversations and maybe they'll even vote differently. You know, maybe they will have the courage to go their own way. So I'm glad you're doing that.
Can I just ask or say something? After you leave their doorstep, they're thinking about what you said. And they may well shift their mind.
And we always ask for their concerns first. We always lead with listening. And it for us, because we've been knocking for the NDP for 20 years, and they used to tell us to go back to Russia and bullshit like that. But they're not anymore. A few, and some will say, we're sorry, we vote conservative, but they say it very politely, and so there is a change in Alberta. But we have to take advantage of it. We have to talk to our neighbors as much as possible. That's all.
I think maybe next one, is there one from the Zoom?
There is. I'm just gonna have,
Is one of you-
Corinne could unmute.
or is it a hand up or is it?
Yeah, just a hand
Okay,
up.
sure.
Yes, is that me? Okay. I was wondering why there's so little challenge of the system, though. We have a privatized system. Why is it that we are not saying that this is the source of the problem? They have a very little taxation in the system. The royalty rates are so low. They have used all the money they have taken to challenge or to get what they want. Why is there so little challenge of this system? The privatized, a privatized oil system that over which we have no control, hardly any. And the amount of crime committed is quite considerable. When I have read Timone's book, and I do think the crime rate is quite hard to excuse. Enough that it should be condemned and it should be changed.
Is that a question you want to direct at anyone?
I'd like anyone who wants to answer why we're not challenging this system. Because I can only see crime here.
No, we did have some government oil companies in the past. They're all got privatized back. We were talking about that today.
I could jump in. Yeah.
Sure, well, I
Sure,
could quickly just say that, I think that these oil companies have largely said, if we don't get what we want, we'll leave, and I think that that's been at the end that we can't call them bluff, so. And if we had to, there's a lot more than enough expertise in this province to run whatever we need to, so. If they threaten to leave, well. Go ahead.
We did touch on this in discussion this afternoon briefly, but there are examples elsewhere in the world where energy or other hydrocarbon resources or other things have been nationalized or even renationalized. And I think that needs to be like a piece of the puzzle or part of the conversations. Probably it's not easy to do, especially in a federalist system like we have, where also the federal government doesn't control natural resources, the provinces do. And we butt up against this jurisdictional battle between the provinces and the federal government. So yeah, it's not an easy one to fix at this stage, especially after sort of we're used to wave after wave after wave of privatization of like public services more broadly. So yeah, I agree, it needs to be part of maybe broader demands, but it's not an easy one, I don't think. Yeah, then we'll do one from before. I think there was a hand up here first that I saw earlier, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, hi, so my question, I know that, I think, Jesse and Natalie were saying, there's lots of good people, lots of good scientists at AER. And, but then we've heard too that, you know, say from Sean, you know, there's very few rigid rules and laws, you know? And, oil and gas are online, you know, that's, AER is not sufficiently arm's length. And so my question is, you know, how much of a role do politicians have in this? I think of the Alberta environment, the parks, they have to, what AER does for mines and for coal mines and oil and gas, Alberta environmental parks has to do for things like gravel pits. You can have the greatest arguments, the greatest science, but in the end, it seems that the politicians are able to have the last word. And I think they do have the last word. I mean, that's just my feeling. I don't know. Perhaps some of the panelists know better that. What is the role of, you know, Grassy Mountain too? That was a political decision. It was great to say AER made the right decision, but I think they did because the people have already said this is crazy. And the politicians realized that let's not go there. And so AER, it's easy for them to make their decision every day. So is that a, am I wrong
I think there's a lot of discussion about, and there should be a heck of a lot more discussion about, you know, the statutory, under the statutory scheme, what decisions can cabinet or government interfere in and which can't they? I have my own strong opinions of that, but, you know, this is something I think everybody wonders about it. And, so I think that, you know, there are the basic principles of separation of the different divisions of government and separation of judicial and administrative branches of government is fundamental. And let's not forget that the AR's primary function is to be a quasi judicial body. In other words, it should act similar to make decisions in a fashion that's similar to judicial decision making. And there shouldn't be interference. So, but there's great interference. And so I think that this is one of the key issues that should be sorted out and clarified with new legislation and those that do interfere. I think we've had a lot of administrative decision making interference in the last little while. And I think that, you know, it's just something we need to clean up, period, and make more clear and clarify. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I think just to add for also context, we talked a bit today about, you know, whether the governing like acts or regulations are sufficient, and then also whether or not the bodies themselves, like the AER, are like, you know, adhering to them or accountable to them. So there's two pieces there. It's whether the acts like allow for this, you know, discretionary powers or otherwise. Yeah, it's just, there's two angles there. There's the people who set policies and regulation, and then there's the actual organizations that carry them out, and whether they're, you know, following their stated mandate or not.
Just a minute. An environmental regulatory organization should not be run by the industry it's supposed to regulate.
For sure.
Yeah, you're here.
And that seems to me like a pretty simple conflict of interest.
Yeah, yeah.
We should be talking about that.
Yeah,
Our tax dollars is paying to have an environmental regulatory industry that is run by the industry it's supposed to be regulating. Good Lord.
Barry, that's the big thing that came out of our meeting this afternoon. I think the
How many
most
Albertans
obvious.
know that? It's not, I don't think it's common knowledge if you go on.
Yeah.
Well, we should get that out there.
maybe one from the Zoom.
Yeah, we have Robert Wild. I'm just gonna ask him to unmute. Robert, are you still there?
Yes. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Well, one of the things that certainly should be brought up is the fact that the government appoints the board members of the AER. We're talking, let us not ever talk about the AER as being as some kind of independent body. They're run by, of, and for, and by the government. And yes, and they're funded, and the whole plan is to have them funded by industry so that industry gets all the benefits. And industry doesn't mind getting, putting in a few dollars so that they get the perks that they need. And then the other thing is, on the national level, why should we, and I know this is outside of Alberta and AER, but going to the, on the national side, is the whole business of all the money that the oil industry, the fossil fuel industries get from the federal government. So we've got we have to talk about the system. We have to put, draw these threads together, because it seems to be, and I was very glad that we heard about exactly how dysfunctional the AER actually seems to be. So it isn't just the AER, it's where it sits, what it does, who funds it. We have to draw these threads together and then put them to the public and say, hey, look, this body has to not just change, but I believe that we have to get something else. Thank you.
Yeah, did you have a question to finish there, Robert, or just save it?
Well, what do you say? What does anybody say about that kind of,
Well, it's not dysfunctional at all, actually. Let's be clear. It was designed this way and it functions in exactly the way it was designed. And so what it needs to do is be functional for citizens and not for industry, for people and the ecosystems, not for cash. And so it's a design problem. It's not, it's working exactly as intended.
Maybe we should rename it as the industry enabling.
Well, we were quipping today that the Alberta Energy Facilitator would be the more appropriate term. Yeah.
Enough of this euphemism already.
All right, and let's go Tego.
Yeah, about a week ago, there were some interesting headlines in the Globe and Mail and, the media that, the AER had announced the progress that was being made in the abandonment of wells, right, and infrastructure in 2022. And it looked not too bad, all in all. And, they talked about what the industry was doing and also the Alberta Wilderness Association, the progress they made. But then and something else came out, I think in the Globe and Mail, that somebody through Freedom of Information managed to find out that there was an internal report within the AER which said the costs were going to be a lot more than what they stated the week before. So it's like, like what they announced to the public, they understate, compared to what they actually believe. I mean, it was just kind of incredible.
We're fully aware of that, and I'm sure you are too, but, the one comment I'd make about that, withholding that, they said they don't withhold information. They said they didn't want to withhold it because it might impact stock prices and markets and stuff. This is government interference in publicly traded stock markets. That's appalling. But, no, AER knows the size of these liabilities. They don't want to let it out. And I mean, I personally know some people like Reagan Boychuk who did a lot of work at the start, and other people have done a lot of work since to try to educate the public on just the sheer number of the liabilities. And that's taking years. But it's time to move past that. It's time to move past that to solutions and make sure that polluter pays. And we have the laws for that. And a lot of people think it's too late. I've got news for you. It's not too late. It's not too late. The federal government's put up about $1 billion, but so far, other than a few loans, the citizens haven't paid much for cleanup yet. And it's $54,000 for every man, woman, and child. And we've got a choice: enforce the laws of the province and fix these problems, and make the correct party play the polluter, or have a broke.
Push it down onto our kids.
No, we'll have a bankrupt province because that is just simply too much. Industry can afford to pay, we can't. It's that simple. And that's part of the bargain, and that's the law. So what's wrong with that? It's not unfair to to ask industry to keep the bargain they made. It's not unfair to enforce the laws of the land. And those who say it is unfair, I submit that, you know, they're on the wrong side of this, so. And then there's all the, you know, if we can't make sure that wells don't leak into groundwater, and if we don't have clean air to breathe and decent water to drink, well, we won't be worried too much about the liabilities, because we won't be here, so, you know, we gotta protect the fundamental things here. And, but yeah, I think that they're breaking their arm, patting themselves in the back in this report, basically, because at the rate that we're cleaning up, it's gonna take well over a century, right?
Well,
So,
I mean,
you know, they're breaking their arm, patting themselves on the back for nothing, because we have to pick up the pace of cleanup immediately. And by the way, if we enforce polluter pay, we'll create the biggest job boom this province has ever seen. We say we're gonna clean up this mess in the next 40 years, we'll have to hire tons of rig companies, we'll have to buy backhoes and stuff like crazy. We can put everybody to work. Every corner of this province, the restaurants will be busy, the hotels will be busy, everything just from surely enforcing polluter pay. So it's gonna take just as much work to undo all this infrastructure as it did to build it for the last 100 years, probably more. It's not as fancy, or not as rewarding and fancy, but it's work and business nonetheless. So Albertans need to know how much economic and business activity there is to enforce our laws and make these companies pay.
I just wanna add, two things. So, you know, I mentioned transparency and discretion earlier in the evening, and I can relate that to just for all these conversations, but in relation to the liability report, so there's a small measure of transparency there. But if you look at the report, and I'm overdue for an A-blog commenting on it, but you know, the AER reflects on sort of, you know, industry meeting or exceeding its closure spend obligations, but of course, those closure spend obligations are set by the AER in its discretion. And so, you know, the actual dollar amount of those figures, you know, is relatively minute relative to the grand scope of the problem. And so that, you know, sort of feeds into the issue here in the sense that, as another example, you know, there isn't a set of rules that is sort of pushing industry towards closure in a time frame that you know, will be achievable in the lifetime of anybody listening in tonight, right? So all of that information has to be read, I think, with that with that in mind. But it's a report, it's a bit of transparency, it's more than we've seen, it's the first report of its kind. And it, I think, has been spurred on by the fact that, as some will know, I mean, the Auditor General is pushing the AER to improve its performance and its reporting in this area. And so, I mean, that there is some momentum there in that sense. So, yeah.
We'll do another one from the Zoom first.
Sure, we have Rod Olsted.
Hello there. Thanks very much for putting this focus on this body, you know, on the AER. And I would say that, you know, lots of money has been made by engineers who have who have put together this crazy plan for the McClelland Lake wetland complex. You know, I mean, it's a ridiculous proposal. And I guess all we can hope for is that hopefully maybe the war in Ukraine will end, and perhaps the price of oil will drop, and it simply won't be worth, you know, it won't be economically viable to proceed with this crazy plan. However, I guess in the hopefully unlikely possibility that this project does go ahead or is inching forward, do you think that it would be possible to get is there a way to delay the project by lobbying successfully the federal government to impose a environmental impact assessment?
Yeah, I can speak a bit to that. So there were impact assessments done, like related to the McClelland expansion. One of them was allowed to be shelved, in place of this plan that Suncor developed, their operational plan, so. It was at the time, it was True North Energy, and they were able to sort of set aside their environmental impact assessment. So long as they put together this plan to sustain the not mined half of the wetland complex. So that's one piece of this. There's also been sort of like federal impact assessment scoping, but it's been quite narrow to do a sort of impacts to like a particular stream that had, fish. So that's under the Fisheries Act and that's federal. So, in speaking to sort of legal counsel on the issue, there doesn't seem to be a lot of avenues to engage the federal government. I mean, yeah, generating the political will or the sort of mass public outrage to pressure political will is always an option. It's a challenge with a place like McClelland where even convincing Albertans that it's in their province and it's worth saving. It's not our mountains, it's not where we go to recreate every day, but it's an important place nonetheless. So yeah, engaging the feds is tough, and then that also gets back to the issue of sort of the jurisdictional battle. Maybe if the federal government were interested in protecting it because of the emissions footprint that we risk sort of putting into the atmosphere to dig up this place and also to, dig it up and then produce oil from it, there may be incentive for the federal government to care about the emission side of things, but I don't know how willing they are to go to war with Danielle Smith right now. So yeah, it's a tough one. It's not easy to try and figure out how to find a path forward to stall or delay the project. It doesn't mean we stop, but yeah, I mean, part of the reason for these AER discussions is that decision that came from the AER in November about, not reconsidering their approval. Under the Responsible Energy Development Act, AER gets sole discretion on reconsideration, so this gets back to the idea of discretionary power. We submitted evidence from two scientists who reviewed the plan, noticed some flaws, and then the other experts weighed in. We submitted all that evidence, and the AER just felt that it wasn't new, extraordinary, compelling enough to reconsider, and it's totally up to them. So that just gets at this issue of sort of the vast discretionary powers that the AER hold. I appreciate your suggestion of engaging the feds. Trying to find a way to do so isn't so easy. But thank you.
Can I make a comment? Sorry, can I?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So just to touch on a few things that we mentioned, I'll say this really quickly, but one of the callers was talking about the system. Totally agree, and I think one of the things we can look at is renewables are coming online now. Let's not make the same mistakes with renewables as we have done with fossil fuels. Community-owned, smaller scale renewables projects would be great instead of just another set of corporations moving into town. I was going to say, talking about political calculation, we can do all these things with impact assessment. It's a political calculation. The government can decide what they're gonna do, right? They just had a moratorium on renewable energies, right? They paused the application of that. They get away with stuff. I think they actually broke the law somehow by doing that as a loophole. They just do it. It's political calculation, and what we need to think about is where is their base, right? Who are the people we need to be talking to and persuading and changing mindsets? Most people have never heard of AER. Let's not kid ourselves. We're not gonna have an uprising. People don't know. So we have to find out what matters to people, and this idea of best interests of Albertans, that does speak to people, but they need to see that it's not working for them. They think that we're getting all this money from these oil companies and that we're benefiting from it. We have to be really clear what is actually happening and what is happening towards their best interest. And just gonna throw out there, where is the political base supporting this government? I think we all know, and there's smart, good people everywhere, cities, rural areas, everywhere. And we have to go out and connect with them and have these conversations. Like, be realistic about what it's gonna take. It's not gonna magically happen.
Thanks, Natalie. Sue from the group here. You've had your hand up for a while, yeah.
It's okay, thank you. I just wanted to let you know that I had put a statement of concern back in November 22, and then 23 closed. And then I didn't have a number, so this is the difficult part. to find a number for that project. So I actually asked the AER, give me that number. And they replied back, and finally, I've got something without a number. And I could write a thing, and she said, you better hurry up. This new statement of concerns was from January 5 to February 5. So I have 3 more days. So I printed and I wrote it. And what they wanted for a suggestion is, what outcome are you seeking? So I wrote down to reverse the decision, to approve the requirement, and no further oil sands mine should be approved, especially not in the nature reserve. We already got a taste of climate change with climate crisis, with fires everywhere in Alberta. Also, we're running out of space for tailings ponds. We should not have to use a lake as a dump. Stop this, please. Do not allow this to go forward once and for all. Suncor has the name, the sun is in it. It could be the best solar energy provider. Cheap and clean. Answer to their question, but of course, all the other stuff I wrote down here, and you have to write down everything that you are appealing. So whenever they call me, then I can just say, yeah, this, and I wrote it all down, whatever came into my head.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, I printed it because they want everything bureaucratic or something. Yeah.
We would like a copy.
Yeah, we'll take a copy.
I'm going to show it to you.
Yeah, please. Another one from the Zoom.
Sure, we have Brian Patterson.
Hi. Somebody on the panel mentioned that we have people power, and I would just like to suggest a possible way forward. Somebody needs to decide what message we need to deliver to the provincial government. I'm not sure who that is, but this panel might not be a bad group to make that decision. Once that decision is made, we have some excellent climate activist organizations in Alberta who would certainly work in coalition to deliver the message to MLAs to start with. And I think that could be done relatively quickly through letter writing particularly. And finally, I think we might consider in the month of April to have a 5-city rally to deliver that very same message to the provincial government. The message has to include the Lake McClellan issue, but it seems to me that it's larger than that. But I don't know the answer to that, but I think a small group has to come up with a succinct message that they can pass on to the people on the ground who will be willing to write their letters and contact their MLAs and our premier.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll address that.
Sure, yeah.
So, just so you guys are aware, I'm the executive director of AWA, and I have to say I was very disappointed, but not surprised by the decision of AER turning down the reconsideration of McClellan Lake Wetland Complex. This is a unique pattern been in northern Alberta. The digging up of half of that, the amount of carbon dioxide that will be sent into the air, the GHGs associated with that are astronomical. And then on top of that, the billion barrels of oil that they say are there, plus all of the trucks and all of the, everything else that's involved in the logistics of getting that out. If Suncor cannot get their stuff together on dry land to prevent spills, how can we trust them to not prevent spills for hundreds of years? Because if they build a wall, that's what they're supposed to do, is to make sure that there is absolutely no error in the functioning of that wall ever, right? To preserve the other half of that wetlands. So, yes, I was disappointed, but I wasn't surprised. So we tried really hard. I would say that we put a lot of effort and money and time and communications into getting Albertans behind the McClellan Lake project. And I'm grateful for every single person who wrote a letter and who supported that. Tomorrow is World Wetland Day. We will be talking about McClellan Lake again. So please, if you see it on any of our social media, please share that out. But what I wanted to just discuss here, because we didn't really preface it before this meeting, is we decided that, you know, after that decision, that we weren't going to get anywhere with AER. We were out of options, both legal and direct communication with AER. So we figured, what was the problem, right? Like, what can we do now in order to keep this in the limelight? The AWA has been fighting for McClellan since the 1990s. We're not going to let it go. We're not going to, even if it comes down to the point where we say, we told you so, we'll be there to point that out. So we pivoted and we said, let's focus on how dysfunctional AER is. And in order to do that, we decided we were going to have a town hall meeting tonight to discuss the issues with the public. And before that, so today, all day today, we had invited Indigenous parties, municipalities, landowner groups, other NGOs, physicians, scientists, lawyers, academics, to come together and discuss what all of those issues are. And so we have, as Mark mentioned, decided that we will build a coalition to move forward on this. Most campaigns that are successful require the voice of more than a few individuals. AWA is about 7,000 members. CPAWS has a certain number of members. AEN has a certain number of members. CAPE has a certain number of members. But when you're going up against a giant like AER and big oil, they can swat us down. We're nothing to them. But if we speak out together as an entire group, like all Albertans and all the Albertans that understand that climate change is an issue, then maybe we can make some change. So we will continue to fight the Don't Mind McClellan campaign because it's important, not just to Albertans, to Canada, all Canadians, and to the world. Those amount of emissions is a huge setback for climate change. And so all I can say is thank you to our panelists who agreed. They're some of the people that were in the discussion today who agreed to come forward and sit on this panel. So we really appreciate all of your support and taking this on tonight. Thank you to our staff who continue to work tirelessly on this campaign, and our board members and Carolyn, who did it in the past and continues to provide support to AWA. And thank you to all of you for being here. It's really important. So please continue to watch this space as we ramp up our campaign to reform the AER. Thank you.
Alberta Talks, we do amazing training and care, and this is a wonderful experience. If you want to feel like we're really doing something, it's very tangible. So check out albertatalks.ca if you're interested.
What I would really like, because you people, somebody here started giving information as to when things are happening and so on, and then I come here. But I don't have enough personal knowledge as to a lot of the issues. I don't have enough intellectual knowledge either, because that's not my area of study. If someone could just send me something and say, these are the main issues, and this is who you send what you want to say to the authorities, and these are who you send it to by email. I can do all that, and I will, so please, if anyone would send me something that I could respond to as one of the voices of this group.
In the Wildlands Advocate, this iteration, Philip's got an excellent article on the AER issues. And I think you're gonna get one for free right now.
There's not.
I got one already, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, there's an AER article in there. There's not so much like I don't finish it with an email address to address, but yeah, it's yeah.
That's more wonderful for the education, but I would really like just an email that I can send things to, or several, or 100.
Yeah.
Because emails are amazing that way.
Okay, so we're working on the strategy now.
Thank you.
Today was the first meeting, and I would say it was a very successful meeting. But yeah, stay tuned, more to come.
Thank you, Deborah, for pulling this together.
Thank you. Thanks all.
Thanks, well, great job.
Yeah. I appreciate it.
I think so.
Thank you.